number one myth that Westerners have about this conflict is that Arabs and Jews have been fighting for thousands of years and they're going to continue to fight.
Tack så jättemycket, Andreas. Vi är här för att visa på vilken sida vi står. Vi är här för att visa att vi står på rättvisans sida.
For the past several years, the Hamas terror organization has been ruling the Gaza Strip, supported by Iran and Hezbollah. For this entire period, thousands of rockets and mortars have been fired at Israeli civilians. Hamas invests much money and efforts to build terror infrastructure in civilian areas and underground throughout the Gaza Strip. Hamas has developed sophisticated smuggling methods. For several years, Hamas has been digging tunnels under the Sinai-Gaza border in order to smuggle weapons, ammunition and explosives, all supplied by Iran. Hamas has camouflaged the openings of these tunnels under the guise of civilian housing, factories, greenhouses and mosques. Tons of explosive materials, powerful explosive devices, rockets, RPGs, grenades, assault rifles, missiles and anti-tank rockets have all been smuggled through these tunnels and stored in these civilian homes, mosques, schools and hospitals. Hamas built its training camps and placed rocket launching sites, explosive devices and snipers nearby medical centers, schools and other public buildings to gain immunity while taking advantage of the local population as
According
human
to
shields.
Palestinian militants, this is the moment an Israeli soldier was killed while patrolling the border between Israel and Gaza. A mine placed under the border fence detonated as the Israeli jeep passed by. Islamic Jihad initially claimed responsibility, but in Gaza the Popular Resistance Committee held a news conference saying it had carried out the attack and issued the video. Earlier in the southern Israeli city of Sderot, a woman screamed for a fireman to put out a burning building. It had been hit by a rocket fired from Gaza. An Israeli woman was moderately wounded. These are the kind of attacks the latest Israeli incursion into Gaza is designed to stop. So far, more than 120 Palestinians have been killed, about half of them civilians. Earlier on Thursday, Israel staged an air raid on Gaza, targeting what it says was a rocket launching site. An Islamic Jihad militant was killed.
their dead in the Gaza Strip, as Israel continues to bomb the territory for a third consecutive day, hitting targets across the area overnight and into Monday. It's bombed the crowded cities of Beit Lahia and Jabalia in the north, and Rafah and Han Yunis in the south, with anger growing both at Israel and the regional players. This is what's left of a house in Jabalia, where an Israeli strike killed 5 children of the same family.
7 of us were sleeping when all of a sudden all the walls came tumbling on us. They were all screaming. I told them all to call for martyrdom because we were all going to die tonight.
And this is what used to be the Islamic University of Gaza. 30,000 students used to study here. But Israel says it was a Hamas site for making weapons and explosives, so it's bombed the university along with the government compound. And this is Rafah. Here, Israel has been attacking the supply tunnels out of Egypt because Hamas, it says, uses them to smuggle in weapons. But one of the strikes hit a residential area, and at least 2 children were killed. Israel is still insisting it only wants to target Hamas.
Often on the news, we hear the terms occupied territories, 67 borders, and illegal settlements. And the story we usually hear sounds very simple. During the Six-Day War, Israel captured the West Bank from the Palestinians, refused the United Nations' demand to retreat, and illegally built settlements. But is that really the case? We'll start with a simple but extremely important question. From whom did Israel capture the West Bank? From the Palestinians? No. In 1967, there was no Arab nation or state by the name of Palestine. Actually, was there ever? So, whose territory is it? Until 1917, the Ottoman Empire occupied the whole region. After losing in World War I, the Ottomans relinquished their 500-year control to the Allied forces, which decided to divide the old empire into countries. Britain recognized the Jewish people's historical right to their homeland, a small area equivalent to about 0.5% of the Middle East was designated for this purpose. But wait a second, do you realize what happened? The Jewish homeland originally included not only the West Bank, but also the East Bank of the Jordan River. I guess you cannot say the Jewish people have not accepted some painful compromises already. With the British mandate ending, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 recommended the establishment of 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. The Jews accepted it and went on to create the State of Israel, while the Arabs refused the compromise and launched a war to destroy the newly established Jewish state. At the end of the war, a ceasefire line was formed, where the Israeli and Arab forces stopped fighting. At the insistence of the Arab leaders, this line was defined as having no political significance. So, although this line is commonly referred to as the 1967 border, it is not from 1967, and it was never an international border. So, let's return for a moment to our illustration and examine the complete chain of events. Israel's presence in the West Bank is the result of a war of self-defense. The West Bank should not be considered occupied because there was no previous legal sovereign in the area, and therefore the real definition should be disputed territory. The 1947 partition plan has no current legal standing, while Israel's claim to the land was clearly recognized by the international community during the 20th century. That is why the presence and construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank should not be considered illegal. So what's the solution for the dispute over the West Bank? Unfortunately, there is no magic solution. But the only way a solution will ever be reached is if we base our negotiations on legal and historical facts. So please, let's stop using the terms occupied territories and 67 borders. They're simply not politically correct.
Arabs were to be given 43% of the land, despite the fact that they made up more than 2/3 of the population and owned over 92% of the land. Jews were to be given 56%, although they comprised only 1/3 of the population and owned less than 8% of the total area.
I was among the people that conquered Akko. When we were walking around, we entered the flat. There was a pair of shoes of a small child, maybe 2 years old. They didn't have time to put on the shoes, so they left the shoes and they ran away. They left everything.
As a result, maybe 300 or so thousand Palestinians had already been expelled before the first Arab soldier entered Palestine.
Some of the neighboring Arab armies finally intervened after May 15, 1948, when Israel officially announced its statehood.
Cleansed much of the territory and took over a large part of the designated Palestinian state.
The new state of Israel encompassed 78% of the total land of Palestine. In that war, Israel occupied the remainder of historic Palestine, what is known today as the West Bank and Gaza. During the 1967 war, Israel displaced more than 400,000 Palestinians, half of whom were 1948 refugees, displaced for a second time in less than 2 decades.
In the summer of 2009, we traveled to Israel and studied the Israeli Defense Force. The IDF is a multifaceted defense force. Comprised of over 176,000 active personnel, the IDF has the 34th largest standing army. It has one of the strongest codes of conduct of any army in the world. In addition to protecting the land of Israel, the IDF takes on humanitarian projects, such as instigating the 1984 program to airlift thousands of Jews out of Ethiopia, or recently setting up a field hospital in Haiti to help earthquake victims. We wanted to investigate the media's portrayal of the IDF. What we found was in stark contrast to the media's depiction, and we became intrigued by this media bias.
We are a moral people, and sometimes when the media shows us some photographs or some movies that might seem very harsh and difficult, and you don't understand what made them do those horrible actions that you might see, but sometimes TV may be very deceptive.
We could not forget that these soldiers were just a few months older than we were, yet their teenage years will be marked by something none of us have experienced firsthand: hostility and war.
These are images of war. The American media constantly bombards us with them. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is no exception. You've seen the images of chaos and violence. But have you seen an Israeli civilian on the beach or a vibrant shuk? How about an Israeli teenager?
In the summer of 2009, we traveled to Israel and explored the similarities and differences between American and Israeli teenagers. But first we wanted to find out what people in San Francisco knew about Israeli teens. What do you think is the leading cause of death of Israeli teenagers?
Maybe like bullet fire, but like random bullet fire or whatever, unintended.
Contrary to popular belief, the leading cause of death among Israeli teens is the same as American teens: traffic accidents. That's not to say that Israeli teens don't have to face the reality of violence. 80% of 18-year-olds in the country serve in the army, and a number of teenagers have been directly affected by war. Ido is one example.
We were at synagogue, and we sat there and studied Torah. I returned home and I found that a Katusha had landed next to my house. I discovered that the Katusha hadn't landed on our house, but next to it. And my room, which is on the outside of the house, had been damaged. Windows had been broken, cabinets had fallen down, and some of the walls had been damaged.
Everyone usually thinks that Israel is a very war-torn area, and that war and terrorism is prevalent, in everyday lives.
We have a lot of activities in Israel, like what?
We can't
the
go
beach,
to clubs,
parties, the we have a lot of hot guys.
It is fun.
Hot guys we have in Israel.
Israeli and American teens have a lot of similarities, but one major difference is the required military service for the majority of Israeli teens.
I'm nervous to go to the army because I am afraid to kill.
People have no chance to get their personal items out. They have no chance to call for help. And this is far away from most media outlets. You are amongst the very few journalists who have even seen this. European or American journalists who have even been here because people are afraid to come or it's too hard to come.
And one of the things we were told in Gaza by a very respected Palestinian psychologist who had just completed a study of 1,000 Palestinian children was that they had discovered that many of these Palestinian children no longer had a will to live, that they were so dehumanized and so affected by seeing their fathers particularly beaten by Israeli defense forces, that the psychological condition is one of the dimensions of the conflict that is not widely understood.
نقول مرت وبراء إن شاء الله راح نحكمهم وإن شاء الله اللي هين راح نحكمهم بس ننظف الضفة إن شاء الله.
الواحد فيهم بشكل ببيع وطنه وببيع كل الأمة العربية زي ما قال أبو الميس الدكتور جورج حبش الحكيم قال ثوروا فلن تخسروا سوى القيد والخيمة. يعني شو لازم يسووا ثورات وكل شيء يعني شو بدهم يخسروا قصور.
حرب سنة 2006 لما صارت حرب نصر الله طلع حسن نصر الله اللي كبت اليهود أكبر خسائر صار يحكي لو إنه أنا بعرف إنه هيك عملوا إسرائيل إنها بدها تقتل تستشهد الكاتب اللبناني ما عملتش الحرب وإحنا نفس الشيء إحنا مش مجبورين نروح 12 يهودي على الفاضي مقابل إنه نروح من عندك 1000 شهيد يعني.
I went to college in the States and I found it very differently. Your biggest
worry about in the States is if I'm going to pass my class, or oh, I hope I have a lot of friends. Over here, it's totally different. You have to worry, oh my God, would I be able to get to school? Is there going to be a checkpoint? Is there going to be a demonstration? Am I going to get shot at? Is there going to be tear gas? So it's like completely different.
Here, it's just like you don't know if you're going to live or you're going to die, you know? You're going to school as if you're going to fight a war. You don't find a tank in the middle of the road on your way to college.
And just the other day, there were 2 tanks and an army jeep, and they're standing there checking your passport and, you know, your student visa and all this stuff. And it's just like, we want to get to school. We want an education. We're humans, and we have a right to our education.
In places like the United States, people cannot understand what's going on because simply the experience is beyond their frame of reference.
I can't study at night because my bedroom light is going to be open and it's across the street from a settlement. They shot at me. I was reading my biology book. I was studying for my midterm, and my mom and dad are like, "No, get out of the room," because they started shooting. I was like, "No, Mom, I want to get an A in the class. Let me study." So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden you hear something on my bedroom window. I was just like, okay, maybe I should go downstairs. I couldn't study for my test. It's like, I tell my American friends, I was like, do you understand what I'm going through?
The state was born in war and is sustained by the threat of war. The state was born in war and is sustained by the threat of war.
I felt like a boy in a Spielberg film. Wow, so many soldiers and everybody moving forward. You feel like you're part of some terrifying power.
There was an atmosphere of stressing us out as much as possible, as if they wanted to push people to some place where they would do anything more easily, that they wouldn't care as much about who they were shooting or what they were shooting at.
I don't remember if it was the squadron or the battalion commander, but with a laser he simply marked for us the line of homes that were to be hit. He said clearly, every house gets a shell. That was the assignment, and it was our job, the tanks, to do it.
No soldiers from the IDF have ever spoken on camera before.
We entered the city in a big hullabaloo, shooting like crazy. None of us knew what we were shooting at. There were those who shot at mosques. As far as I was concerned, if they didn't shoot at me from a specific mosque, then I had no reason to harm someone's religion.
The order was very clear. If a car came within 200 meters of me, I could simply shoot. Shoot a shell at it. We needed to cleanse the neighborhoods, the buildings, the area of the neighborhood. It sounds really terrible to say cleanse, but those were the orders. Families with children, without anything, without bags, with no preparation. The moment the building got the second shell, I would watch the procession of the family leaving the building.
I knew it would be difficult to keep some morality, and I didn't succeed. I killed people, and that was wrong.
When you see it for the first time, with the stick of wood and the white flag attached, the white flag that they carried, with all the children and all the babies, it doesn't matter. You'd call your soldiers to go out and look at it. But on the other hand, you'd be terribly alert. You'd follow them with your eyes, and you'd have your hand on the trigger.
Every time we got out of our tanks, there was always this thing of comparing who'd killed more. It was completely disgusting. All the time they'd come and say, "Great, we heard you killed 2 yesterday." And I was like, "What's great? That's something good? It's not good." For a few days we were shooting at chicken coops. I thought it was idiotic. Yeah, at chickens. Deterrent fire, they called it. Every hour we had to shoot a few rounds from the machine gun at the chicken coops. Why? To deter people? Or to deter chickens? I don't know. I always tried to aim up at the sky so that I'd miss them. In the end, it's a person's livelihood, and these are chickens. They hadn't harmed anyone.
Of their tour of duty inside Gaza. Images of young Israeli men barricaded inside Palestinian homes. There's graffiti on the walls. Here, beneath the Star of David, it says, Am Israel Chai, long live the people of Israel. There's an almost festive atmosphere in some of the pictures.
My wife and my mum had a surprise for me. What surprise? Well, my mum had bought me a new plasma TV. So I entered our home and saw the new telly. Now, I'm not mad on television, but my mum thought I'd be so happy to see the plasma. They'd hung up new shelves and painted the walls. They'd fixed up the house so that I returned to a renovated home. All clean, newly decorated. And I stood and looked at the house, and I just couldn't accept it. I wouldn't agree to this because at that moment I saw the house that we had left in Gaza and the family. Of course, their house remained, but most of the neighborhood where that house stood was gone now. And I knew that when that family returned to that house in Gaza, what would they see? And here I am, in a new house, renovated with a plasma TV. And it's at this point that everything changed. The pain began to come, the sadness, and the tears.
Well, would all the violence and conflict in the Middle East evaporate if Israel simply ceased to exist? My next guest says Israel is not only breaking Jewish law with its military strikes against the terrorist group Hezbollah, but that the state of Israel itself should not even exist in the first place. What you may find more shocking is that the person saying that is a rabbi. He is Yisrael Weiss from Jews United Against Zionism. Rabbi,
yes,
pretty strong words.
Yes, but this is the view that was shared by all religious leaders throughout, the last 100 years when the whole movement of Zionism was created. The concept, the ideology of transforming Judaism from spirituality, a religion, into a materialism, a nationalistic goal to have a piece of land. All the rabbinical authorities said this is antithetical with what Judaism is all about, expressly forbidden in the Torah, because we are in exile by God.
So you shouldn't have a state. You shouldn't have a country. You shouldn't have a government.
We shouldn't have a state. We should be living amongst all the nations as the Jews were doing for 2,000 years as loyal citizens. Right. Jews are suffering, the Palestinians, the Lebanese are suffering. We pray for the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state.
It's interesting, Rabbi. You don't hear that view often. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
Crammed behind barricades in Midtown Manhattan, hundreds demonstrated across the street from the Israeli embassy.
The most harmful place for Jews are in Israel.
Unfortunately, our name, our identity has been hijacked by an evil, vile, selfish movement that is purely political, ungodly.
I know the Arabs are very good, no problem till the Zionist movement starts. My grandmother tell me, before the Zionist movement started, they babysitting each other, the kids.
Because the history has attested to the fact that the Arab and the Muslim countries were exemplary in their hospitality for Jews, and we are supposed to and required to be grateful and show our thanks to them.
The idea of Zionism to take away the land from the Palestinians, from the Arabs, is starting the whole fighting. Not Arabs the problem, not Jews the problem, not Judaism, not Muslim, only Zionism.
Rachel Corrie, American, killed by an Israeli army bulldozer. Tom Herndl, British, shot through the head by an Israeli army sniper. James Miller, British, shot dead by the Israeli army. If foreigners are dying like this in Gaza, what's happening to the people who live there?